everyone, how are you doing today? Good to see you. So it's Sally here and welcome to Menopause Mindset Monday. This is the place to learn how to have a much better menopause using the power of our minds and our mindset. So how are you doing today? Let me know how you are. If you've had a great weekend, let me know what you've been up to. We of course have been painting the front room and we are inundated with the fumes of varnish now. So I'm as high as a kite. I definitely don't think that's a good thing. Okay, so today's topic is called Men and Menopause. How can we help them and how can we allow ourselves to be helped? So, before I dive into this, first of all, I want to just speak to what I was thinking about earlier. And what I was thinking about was, what do I mean by men? So in this talk, what I actually mean is men who were born biologically in a male body. And the reason I say this is because I've recently come across the idea of a queer menopause. So I want to really investigate that, and I want to do a whole live around queer menopause or get someone in to talk about queer menopause as a separate issue. So just to say that if you are a queer person watching this and you don't feel that the material is relevant to you, I will address that more specifically later on. But you might find that some of these things relate to you as a person. And of course they will, men, women, queer, whatever, we are all people. And people, although there are some nuances, generally, as a general rule, people have similar, I don't know what the word is, similar psychologies, similar spiritual values. Yeah, values based on kindness and consideration and things like that. So let's get into it. I've got for you 3 reasons why this subject of men and menopause is vitally important. And then I've got 2 ways that you can help and be helped. So 3 reasons why the subject of men and menopause is vitally important. So number 1, I would guess, and this is an educated guess. I've not done any research on this, but this is an educated guess. The less men know about menopause, the worse our symptoms could be. And I'm saying this because menopause is like stress is at the center of menopause. And if we are feeling frustrated, if we're feeling misunderstood, then I really do feel that that can make our symptoms worse. And the less men or people know about menopause, I think the more we perpetuate the stereotypes of, dried up old prune, those horrible things like mad woman in the attic, oh, she's just going through the change, she's just hormonal. It really does nothing for our sense of self-worth. It does nothing for our sense of self-esteem. And at menopause, all of these things are beginning to change. Our confidence, it's like it crumbles because it has to be rebuilt. And if we're not being supported emotionally and spiritually through that journey, it can be really difficult indeed. So it does nothing for our self-worth. It does nothing for our motivation. It does nothing for our libido and things like that. And yeah, one thing I did want to say is that our male allies, our male friends, what tends to happen is that they witness the emotional stuff first. So, and I think that's what gives menopause a bad rap. Because they witness the brain fog, the forgetfulness, the lack of self-esteem, the emotional outburst, the rage, the anger, the lack of libido. They might witness the weight gain. They might witness the sort of erratic behavior, the constant changing of minds and things like that. And this can really lead men to feel quite confused, quite isolated. It can make them kind of tread on eggshells, tread on thin ice around us. And when they feel confused, when they feel uncertain, yourself, when you feel confused and uncertain, you can retreat, you can end up shutting down, and you can sort of look elsewhere to get your nourishment. So perhaps, maybe at menopause, if women and men and partners aren't dealing with it properly, maybe that's why partners can end up going off and having affairs, because there's no nourishment in the actual relationship. And in terms of work, there's this idea that, oh, she's just hormonal, or you could be seen as being unapproachable, and it's just not good. We need to feel supported in this whole journey. So it's actually in men's nature to want to help us. It's actually in everybody's nature to want to help each other, quite frankly. So if we want men to, hang on, let me just go, sorry, I've got a bit of brain fog today. It's in men's nature to want to help. And if they can't help us because they're feeling powerless, or if they're feeling helpless, or if they're feeling trapped or confused, or, whatever negative emotion it may be, that is likely to perpetuate your own symptoms too. So that is one of the reasons why men and menopause is very important. So number 2, if our male partners, bosses and colleagues can support us, then we, on the flip side, can have a better menopause. And this is because we feel understood, we feel supported. Now, you and I both know there is nothing worse than not feeling understood. It can make us feel like we are batshit crazy. And it actually takes us back psychologically to childhood, when perhaps a parent or caregiver didn't understand us. So when we feel like we're not being understood, what happens is we can end up then acting out. And acting out might look like sulking, it might look like lashing out, it might look like going for things that we're dependent on to soothe our emotions, like food or drink. So I've said it before, and I will say it again, that most of us have some kind of childhood trauma. Now, childhood trauma doesn't have to look like abuse or neglect. Childhood trauma can literally feel like, when you're a child, nobody understands me. When you are alone in your feelings of doubt. So if you're a child and you're having an emotional response to something, and nobody is there to soothe your emotional response, that's trauma. So children can't regulate their own emotions. They need an adult to teach them about their emotions. They need an adult to soothe them, to make them, or to help them feel like they are okay with that emotion. And if that can't happen, you end up with trauma in the nervous system, and that plays out in relationship dynamics, with everything, with people, with drugs, with work, with everything. And so when, as menopausal women, when we don't feel like we are understood, it takes us back to those childhood traumatic memories, and that's why we lash out even more. That's why we feel rageful and vengeful even more. And that it doesn't help our reputation. This is the thing. She's the crazy one. She's the one who needs extra help. She's the forgetful one. She's the confused one. And all of those things really, the brain fog and stuff like that. Yes, it is symptomatic of hormone changes, but it can also be lack of confidence as well. Feeling that we're over the hill because of that narrative that we have. So if men can learn about the menopause, we can then begin to create safer relationships with the men in our lives, and if they're intimate relationships, more passionate relationships with the men in our lives, which will all form part of a healthier midlife transition. Yeah, Gloria, you've said the lack of understanding is so draining. Yeah, it really, really is. I'm going to get a little bit more to this in a minute. So number 3 then, why we need men to understand about menopause, is when men learn to understand menopause better and act in a way that supports women through this transition, we can then learn to transcend the ego, right? So, because a lot of this learning about menopause is really about men and women, but mostly men, or people that don't have menopause. This is really about them learning to understand that then they've not always been right. So a lot of this is about putting the ego to one side and perhaps admitting that we've been doing it wrong. And women, like lashing out on our menfolk. admitting that we've been doing it wrong. And this is really crushing for the ego. The ego does not like to be wrong. And so in order to learn about menopause more, we have to transcend the ego for the sake of our fellow humans, right? Not just for ourselves, but for everyone, because we're all interlinked. Every human being is interlinked. It's like those ripples going out. One affects the other. So this idea of the inflated ego is really important because the world at large is sort of based on, the patriarchal systems are based on inflated ego. And so when we come from a place of education, learning and understanding, that is when we can really learn to transcend it. And it's not easy. It's very, very triggering because we're feeling this like egoic response and we want to lash out, but we can't. And this is what happens in men as well. They feel this like egoic charge of energy. They want to lash out. They want to lash back, but they know that it's not always fruitful to do that. So by learning about the menopause, we learn to transcend the ego. And simply out of curiosity, the more curious we can become, the more questions we can ask, the more we can soften the nervous system as well. So, and then we can make a huge amount of headway towards creating a society that is much more inclusive, educated, non-reactive, and more peaceful. So in a nutshell, men educating themselves about the menopause and women helping men to understand the menopause better is actually an act of social activism and social justice, right? So, but as we will see, it all starts with your own well-being, because you can't teach others about menopause if you still have shame around your own menopause and anger. Like anger, yes, we feel angry, but sorry, let me just shut that off. But we need to learn how to direct it in a way that is better for everyone involved, because actually we don't always get what we want if we lash out. So yeah, I've been talking to some activists recently who are agreeing with me that going on marches and things like that, it's actually not getting the results that they are wanting to see. What is getting the results is education, asking questions and seeking to understand those who are different. So it's huge. So, right, I'm going to give you 2 very powerful tips to help you reframe your perspective around your own communication when it comes to menopause. Because that's the thing, we want to communicate. We want to communicate about it more, but how do we do that? Well, number 1, we really have to transcend our own shame. We have to work on releasing our own shame, our own embarrassment when it comes to the menopause. We have to learn that menopause is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, because not every woman is going to get pregnant and have a baby. But every woman with a uterus and ovaries is going to experience the menopause. There's so much education on pregnancy. There's not very much education given to us around menopause. We have to seek it out. Although this is changing. I've heard that menopause education is being given in schools now from September. So that is a massive win. So really we need to normalize it. And we can only normalize it by talking about it. The more we talk about it, the more we say the word menopause, like saying the word vagina or penis or sex or period or whatever, we normalize it. And that is how we transcend the shame and the fear around talking about it. But there is a fear barrier, and I think it's really important to address this idea of, if I go first, if I'm the first one to talk about menopause in a dinner party setting, for example, or on a Facebook Live, will I potentially be rejected? Will people see me as, too much? That's too much information. I really don't like that too much information thing, because is it really too much information? It's going to happen to half the population, so why not talk about it? So, yeah, fear of being rejected is a big one when it comes to talking about menopause. Fear of saying something embarrassing, fear of being shamed. But here's the truth. You can't be shamed, you can't be rejected, you can't be embarrassed if you choose, unless you choose to let it in. If you choose to let it in, and if you choose to interpret the scenario as embarrassing or shameful or being rejected, then you will be. So it's like this analogy, isn't it? If someone tries to give you a gift and you refuse the gift, who has still got the gift? The person who's trying to give it to you, the gift being the rejection. So if someone reacts badly to you voicing your stuff on your menopause, that is a reflection of their programming, their childhood programming, their cultural conditioning, their shame, their embarrassment. It's their stuff coming to the surface and not yours. And it's only yours if you then overreact to their shame, their embarrassment. They're telling you it's too much information. Of course, it's normal to feel that reaction, and we often do, and we then want to cower and shy away from it. But the trick is to keep pushing it forward, keep on exposing yourself to the potential for fear of rejection, fear of being shamed, fear of being embarrassed. Like, is it really that bad? It's not life-threatening. You know, in a life-threatening situation, you do want to move away from it. But if it's an emotional reaction, this is really about learning to cope with those emotions, to deal with those emotions for the sake of yourself, for the sake of other women, for the sake of social justice, for the sake of moving things forward, pushing boundaries, being progressive, being forward thinking, and not succumbing to the fear. You know, choosing to place a different meaning on someone else's reaction to the word menopause. Understanding and knowing that if they are having that shameful reaction to your word menopause, that's a good thing, because it means you are opening it up, you're prizing it open, you're going there, and that can only be a good thing. So we have to be prepared to take some flack. And I actually think that perimenopausal women have zero fucks to give. This is something that I've come across recently. You know, the older we get, the less fucks we have to give. And that's a great thing. So this is about normalizing it, talking about it, educating yourself so that you know what you're talking about, and being proud of your menopause. Like, you're proud of your kids, you're proud of giving birth, you're proud of your children that you've conceived and grown in your body and pushed out and then educated and grown up. Be proud of your menopause, because your menopause is you giving birth to a new version of you. It's a wonderful transition with so much potential. We need to stop being shamed by it. We need to start seeing it very, very differently. Like, in a sense, we are giving birth to ourselves. Because when we're younger, you know, the world is all about materialism. When we're younger, it's all about the outer. When we transition into menopause, it becomes all about the inner world. And that's a beautiful thing. All right, so on to my next point then, number 2. So I think this is what Gloria was getting at earlier. The lack of understanding is so draining, for sure. So when we are talking about menopause, it's very easy to get very angry about it. And that anger and rage and frustration and indignation is real. So with my feminist hat on, put my feminist hat on for a minute, it shouldn't be down to women to educate men and others about menopause. In the same way, it shouldn't be down to Black, Indigenous and people of colour to educate white people about racism. They've had enough suffering. They need to just, do the work themselves, do the change, and without calling upon the people who are suffering to educate them because they've suffered enough. That's the truth. That's with my feminist hat on and my social justice hat on. But the truth is, the plight is usually on the sufferer to educate the other person. So I think we need to be really savvy about the way that we do this. So from a spiritual and psychological perspective, it's important to learn not to misdirect the anger. So let's turn it around for a minute. How do you feel when someone gets mad at you? When someone takes their anger out on you, do you respond well? Do you go, oh, let me see if I can understand you? Probably not. It probably makes you feel angry. You then either lash out at them, you get defensive at them, you shut down, or you just stay in your ego and your own self-righteousness. So anger usually meets anger, unless this other person is much more kind of evolved and can rise above it and can actually see it for what it is. So anger is very natural, rage is very natural, especially at the injustice of everything, but it's down to us as women to direct that anger and to be responsible with that anger. So of course we need to discharge the anger, but we can do that in really healthy ways, like screaming into a pillow, writing a blog, putting on some heavy metal music and just screaming, or writing it, journaling it, or, getting it out with a friend in conversation. But please try not to misdirect your anger at your partner or your bosses or your male friends or your colleagues, because you will not get the results that you want, right? This is about, like I've said, discharging your anger sensibly and then thinking intelligently about how we can get what we need, how we can get what we want to make our menopausal life better. So instead of demanding them and lashing out, we need to ask them to be curious about menopause. Remember, curiosity downgrades ego. If we can ask them to be curious and we can plant the seed in their mind, if you learn about this menopause stuff, there's going to be a lot in it for you. Then they will start to open up, because innately we are all selfish. We all want to know what's in it for us, right? So if the men in your life can be more curious and non-judgmental, if they can offer empathy, if they can active listen to us, if they can help around the house more, if they can take a more proactive role in care duties, if they can raise their standards for household cleanliness, if they can raise their own self-care standards, if they can learn to be patient with you, if they can learn to be more open with you about sex, if they can be open to sleeping arrangements, if they can be open to just taking more responsibility for, organizing social things, if they can be open to, helping you grow, nurturing your confidence through this process, helping you go from the caterpillar into the butterfly, they're going to get so much. They are going to get so much from you. Or they're going to get so much for themselves. Here's what they're going to get. They are going to experience a happier version of you. They are going to experience a nicer version of you, a more productive version of you, a safer version of you, a hotter, sexier version of you. And I don't mean hot flushes. I mean, a hotter version of you, a hornier version of you. There you go. They're more likely to get a relaxed version of you, a less reactive version of you, a more social version of you. Yeah. You are going to be more on their side, and if they're on your side, if they can understand more about you, you're going to be on their side. And if you don't lash out on them about your menopause and encourage them to be curious, ask more questions, learn and understand, they're going to get more from you. See how it's all interlinked. Nothing happens in isolation. And unfortunately, it's probably not on men's radar. If it was on their radar, then they would possibly be more likely to educate themselves about menopause. But if it's not even on their radar, they're not going to do it. So we have to be the ones to enable, to plant that seed in the men's minds, whether it's bosses, colleagues, friends, husbands, partners, uncles, fathers, whatever. So that's really it. That's really all I've got to say. So I just want to conclude all of that. So there's 2 ways to help men understand menopause better. Number 1, release your own shame. Move into that fear of rejection. Give 0 fucks. And recognize the fact if somebody is having an emotional reaction to menopause, that's a good thing, because you are doing something to ignite that thought. You're planting a seed. You're getting them to think differently about menopause. And we really need to open up the conversation. Releasing your own shame as well looks like doing your own inner work, clearing your childhood whether that's with RTT, whether that's with any other kind of therapy, whether that's just through journaling, coaching, counseling, therapy. Do your own inner work, find out where it all came from, and then rip it up. Because it's not yours, it came from the past, and we are changing now. So number 2, as much as you want to, don't direct your anger at them. It does not work. Discharge your anger in a healthy way, and then ask them to be curious about menopause. Tell them what's in it for them. If they learn about it, if they educate themselves about menopause, what are they going to get? And then hopefully that will be a selling point for them. It's really off-putting when you shove, and I've done this before, you shove a book under your partner's nose, or you send them a YouTube video to watch. It's quite repellent, actually. When anybody sends me a YouTube video to watch and they say, you must watch this, I'm like, why should I? What's in it for me? But if I know what's in it for me, watch this because you will get X, Y, Z, then I'm like, I'm a bit more curious. So it's really playing into how people's minds work, how people's emotions work, so that we can get what we want, they can get what they want, and the world becomes a better place. So that is it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've got a couple of announcements. Firstly, I wanted to say that tomorrow, Tuesday, the 7th of July, 2020, I'm going to be doing a talk for the Kent Fire Service about menopause and all of this stuff. So I'm going to be busy planning that today and tomorrow. So I'm really excited about that. And it's just a shame that it's not in person, because I would quite like to see some firefighters. So just to mention what last week's podcast was about. Last week's podcast, which is available now, was with my personal trainer, Zalika Sassa, and she's got a really interesting story. She had arthritis. She was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis at age 13. Definitely worth checking out. We talk about the emotional stuff underlying it. We talk about how she ignored the doctor's advice, because the doctor was telling her not to exercise, and intuitively she knew that she needed to keep on exercising but do it in a different way. So that was really interesting. And then, so that's episode 12, I believe, available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then this week's podcast is very different. This week's podcast is with Anna Price, who is a tarot card reader and a crystal ball reader. So we're getting really woo, we're getting really spiritual, and we're talking about this idea of maiden, mother, enchantress, and crone. And it's really, really interesting, actually, to learn where we fit into that, where perimenopause is on that kind of analogy. So, and she also gives us a tarot reading at the end, which is lovely. So do check them out. All right, my lovely ones, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Feel free to ask me any questions about RTT or about your menopause. And I'll see you next week. Lots of love. Bye.